Hey friends, welcome back to Who What Where, a true crime podcast. This week we got like a very gruesome one. This is Caitlin talking, by the way. I did the research for this episode and they're just like there was like more and more stuff like every time I like clicked to a new page. Like it was like it seemed like a bottomless case, which those are like honestly my favorite.
Yeah.
Okay, cool.
So the Snowtown murders were ones, that's what we're talking about today, guys.
Yeah,
Take it away.
Snowtown Murders.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, go for it. I don't
So
care.
when we first started to be like, oh, we should do a true crime podcast, I was like, okay, cool. We have to think of some things to talk about. And we made like a brainstorm list that honestly I feel like we've kind of stuck to. We've done a lot of the topics that were on that list.
Yeah.
But I popped this on there because I like was looking up like unheard of or kind of unknown or like weird kind of true crime cases, and I think this is one that has a little bit of like a pop culture situation, like maybe there was a movie made after it or something like
So
that.
there was a movie,
Okay.
and like I think the reason that this one isn't as popular in the United States is because it takes place in Australia.
So that was
And
another thing that I thought was cool, was it takes place in a different country, and so I added this to the list not even really knowing anything about it, so I'm excited to hear about what it's about, like what
yeah,
happened.
so well, funny story. I for some reason like I think I forgot. It's like that situation where you like you know details of the case, but you kind of forget like what the main premise is or like the name. Like I never would have associated what I remember from this case with Snowtown murders or whatever. Like it didn't
Okay, I see what
connect
you're
for
saying.
me.
Yeah.
But
Or even
this kind of
last week when we were talking about, or the week before when we were talking about Jodi Arias, you guys kept saying that too. You were
yeah,
like,
I was
oh, I
like
feel
I
like I've
know who
heard
this
about
is
this,
now,
but
but I think like I
connect.
didn't make the connection. I didn't make the like synaptic like but I this kind of makes me I think pretty soon I want to do the highway like backpacker murderer that was in
Oh yeah.
Australia too, because that's like a pretty cool case as well. That kind of just reminded me of it. Um, the thing about Australia is like they have a pretty low like crime rate, like in general it seems like, and so it's very unique to
So I guess when
have
there is a crime
like an
like this,
actual
everyone's like,
serial
oh my
killer.
God.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well,
Yeah.
exactly. Yeah.
You want to know what a true crime was that I experienced today?
Yes.
Okay. I went to the gym this morning and I walked into the gym and I thought something was weird right off the bat, and all of the TV screens were playing the same thing.
Oh,
And I'm
weird.
just, that's a true crime on the fucking on the damn um gym's fault. Like what? That was just weird, right?
I
Like,
mean,
have
it
you
is
ever
kind
seen
of
that
weird.
happen? And
I
I
haven't. No.
and it happened, it was, so I go to the gym for like 45 minutes, and the entire 45 minutes it was like that. So it wasn't like no one noticed and said anything. Like I'm sure someone noticed.
It's
I'm
like they were doing
it
it
was
on
like, or it
purpose.
was like that was the only channel that was working or something. I don't know.
Wait, what channel was it?
It was like I don't know what channel, but it was like that true crime. It was like a
Oh, like
NCIS or something.
Discovery or ID or whatever?
Oh,
Oh, it
NCIS.
was NCIS?
No, no, it was the other one. But not Law and Order. Isn't there another one that's kind of like a D-list show? Like
Days of Our Lives? I
I
don't
don't
know.
recognize any of the people in it. Anyway, normally, so I'm not a true crime person myself. Like I usually don't watch the TV. I'll just say that too. Um,
Yeah.
but usually they play Charmed, which that is a true crime. Like that, the fact that that is a real TV show is a true crime.
Wait,
Um,
Charmed? Is that the one with like the like sisters that
The
are
Three
witches?
Sisters. It is the
That's a
worst
good
editing
show.
I've ever seen
Oh,
in my
that's
entire
fair.
life, which I guess it's like fair because it's probably a little bit older, but normally I like will look up and see that every once in a while, but this one I was just like, what the heck is happening? Anyway, that's the true crime news that you needed for the episode to start. Proceed.
I like well, I haven't been watching or I haven't been listening to a lot of podcasts lately because I've been really into audiobooks and I just finished listening to The Only Good Indians.
Mhm.
It's like a horror novel, but I listened to the audiobook. It was so good. Like so good. Highly recommend if you're into
Oh,
audiobooks.
another true
But
crime we're reading this month in our book club. We're reading My Sister the Serial Killer.
yeah,
So that's kind of
which
true crime.
yeah,
It's crime. It's
I've
a
heard some
crime.
really good things about it, so it should be a cool. I mean, it's like a fiction story, but well, I mean, so was The Only Good Indians, but it was just like it was so like psychological and like well thought out and like this story was like entirely unique. Like I couldn't think of another story that was even similar to it and like
That's
I just
cool.
thought that was kind
That's
of
always
cool.
fun.
Anyway,
Yeah.
um but yeah, so let's hop into the case. So on May 20th, 1999, and let's get it out of the way that like Hannah saying the F word is not the craziest thing that's gonna happen in this episode. There is, torture. There is like homophobia to an extreme.
Ew.
Um,
That's the
there
worst part.
is just like a real creep of a dude. And yeah, there's gonna be some really gross stuff in this, so just as a warning, the F
Trigger
bomb.
warning.
If you can't handle the F bomb,
You cannot
a lot of
handle
this
this
probably
episode
isn't gonna be
at
for
all.
you.
Yeah.
Um, yeah. So for I mean, the thing is like this I don't know. Basically like this the subject of our story today is pretty fucked up, but he is like a master manipulator. So like there are just so many times when he manipulated other people into doing bad shit. And I'm not saying that those people that he manipulated aren't partially at fault because they definitely are, but like just as a precursor, like this was an interesting situation, but like at the heart of it was like an absolute psychopath of a man, like
Hmm.
there's a lot of people involved, there's gonna be a lot of names. um this probably will be a pretty long episode, so like hopefully you're having a long car trip or you're at the gym and you need somebody to hang
At
out
the
with.
gym,
We're
and
glad that
all of the
you
gym TVs are on the same episode of CSI that you've seen at least 5 times. What do you do?
yeah.
What do you do? You
What do you
listen
do?
to
You
the
listen to
episode.
us, and we are so happy to have you guys. So, on May 20th, 1999, South Australian police near Adelaide were looking for Elizabeth Hayden, a woman who had been missing over 6 months at this point. And during this search for her, they found the remains of 8 other missing people inside of 6 plastic barrels that were in an abandoned bank vault in Snowtown. So, Snowtown is like a couple 100 kilometers, like 150, I think, if I remember correctly, from Adelaide. It's like this little tiny farm town kind of out in the middle of nowhere. So like the fact that their trail ended with them like coming across these like barrels that like they had like acid in them. The people were trying to dissolve these bodies and like that was like where the trail ended and it's like this abandoned bank. Like that was like it literally like rocked Australia's world, So
The entire country of Australia, let alone just like this tiny town of
yeah,
Snowtown, yeah.
exactly.
So
So John Justin Bunting, he's the aforementioned psychopath. He was born September 4th, 1966. And there's no way to sugarcoat this other than he was a serial killer, like from birth. I'm convinced. He like killed animals for fun. He was like a huge bully and like master manipulator. Like he bullied people into doing things for him. And he claimed to have been molested by a friend's older brother at age 8. And this kind of gave him like a lifelong, this is kind of what triggered his like weird, like distrust of like anybody he deemed to be a pedophile. And I will mention that he kind of like conflated pedophilia and homosexuality. Like in his brain, they were like both just as evil of like things, and like so it
Well,
seems
it's
like he
probably
didn't
because he was
distinguish between them.
molested by someone of the same sex, I assume, is why he
Yeah,
thought they were but I mean, I'm not agreeing with him, obviously.
yeah, for
That would
sure.
be kind of the connection he probably made, especially if it is true and he was at the young age of 8, like you probably really want to know how
Yeah.
to differentiate the two
And
in
I
like this
mean
really
this,
traumatic experience.
yeah, that's true. Yeah, he basically like didn't really see a difference between
Hmm.
homosexuals and pedophiles. Like to him they were one and the same, right?
Which we
Um,
don't agree with, by the way, if anyone's
well,
wondering.
yeah.
We do not
And
agree with JJ Bunting. I'm gonna call him JJ. Is that okay?
absolutely not.
Oh, is that too nice? That might be
That's
too nice.
way too nice. That is way too nice, and you will come to agree with me as the episode goes
John
on.
Jacob Jingleheimer Smith. Okay.
So, there's like this story of him as like a preteen, like younger, and he would like mix together like random household chemicals that he could find, and he would drop insects into them to see what happened.
Ew.
Apparently he asked his mom at one time, like, he would constantly ask her, like, oh, what happens to this? Like, if I drop, like, if I put like an animal in this, like, what would happen? Or like, this like random chemical, mom, like, what does it
Ew.
do? Like, yeah. Um,
Meanwhile, I'm still afraid to like clean my bathroom with two different types of cleaner because I'm afraid to mix chemicals and die. So,
so one time I accidentally, got like a head high from doing that.
see, we're normal. JJ Bunting is not.
Basically because I was just a fucking idiot and I put Comet in my toilet, and then I used like those like that like gel stuff that you clean the toilet with, and they both have bleach in them. So it was just like a lot of bleach. Anyway,
Too much
uh
bleach. Okay.
so basically I want you to get an idea of like how weirdly obsessed John Bunting was with the idea of like tracking down pedophiles and homosexuals, because it it was like an obsession that like can't really be understated, and like it's possible that if he hadn't like kind of gone on this like track of like I have to hunt down all
Right.
pedophiles and like if he hadn't done that, it's possible he may never have killed anybody, because like he was on one about pedophiles, or not actual pedophiles, let me remind you, like most of the time it was just people that he like
Perceived to
assumed were
be
pedophiles,
homosexuals.
or somebody had like told him were pedophiles, like through the rumor mill or whatever.
Okay, so
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 in
far we have somebody that is like taking justice into his own hands.
Yeah,
yes,
But
see,
he
like
doesn't
you,
actually know
for
who's
sure.
guilty
yeah,
and who's not.
yep,
And he believes homosexuals are on the same level as pedophiles, correct?
yes, yep, you're up
Okay,
to date.
I'm all caught
He's
up.
not playing with a full deck of
It's
cards, is what
Australia.
someone
What
say.
year?
19
1966.
like 8 late 90s.
Oh, he was born in 1966.
Oh,
So
late
Yeah,
90s.
late
Okay.
90s.
Okay, cool.
So
I'm there.
in John Bunting's home, in his home, he had this like he called it a rock spider wall. So rock spider apparently is like prison slang for a pedophile. So like a rock spider is a pedophile. They use it to like distinguish, because pedophiles don't do so well in prison. Like
Is this the
even
Australian thing?
yeah, but
yeah.
why
Because
rock
they have
spider?
weird things about spiders.
Wait, hold on. Let me see if there's a type of spider. Go ahead and continue.
Okay. And basically, like on this wall in his house, he had like information and names of all these people that he remotely was suspicious of being pedophiles. Like, or he had like heard things about, or he, by the end of it, he kind of had started to like be like, oh, this person is friends with this person. They must both be pedophiles. You know what I mean? So he often like later, before he started killing, he would like call and harass these people regularly. Like he would just pick a random person, call them up, and just verbally abuse them over the phone and say that they were going to get what was coming to them because they were a pedophile and like they're a dirty person, and all the fun things. This was before he escalated to murder. He would like just call and verbally abuse
people.
random
Okay.
people. So basically Bunting, he had kind of like the worst combination of personality traits, because like one, he was like crazy obsessed with like taking down the wrongdoers of the world, right? But also he was like apparently super charismatic, and like he had this like way with him where he could kind of convince people to do whatever he wanted. Like he was very like magnetic, and like he was good at like making people feel important just long enough for
Such
them to do
cult
something
leader
for him, you know?
vibes. Such cult
Yes.
leader
Like,
vibes,
well, and that's a very, like, those are very psychopathic traits, you know? So,
yeah.
and like I was saying earlier, Australia has a pretty low crime rate. Like, this is like just crime in general, like, be not even looking at serial killing. So, this like tiny little farming town of Snowtown, like, I mean, Adelaide is pretty big. So Adelaide is, I think it's in the top 5 biggest cities in South Australia, like population wise, but it's also like called the city of churches.
Oh.
And
Oh no.
basically it like is a pretty safe place to live. I mean, it was up until the 90s. I don't know what it's, you know, at this time it was super safe to live in Adelaide. But basically in the like mid 90s, early mid 90s, a lot of people started moving to Adelaide. So it wasn't really like this like city anymore. Like it started to kind of spread out and become like lots of suburbs, and a lot of the suburbs had low income housing. And
Okay.
so that kind of attracted people who were into doing criminal activity. This is where we find John Bunting. Shocker,
Okay.
I know. So at age 22, this was around the time that he moved into the suburbs of Adelaide. John Bunting, at age 22, he worked at a slaughterhouse. And he reportedly like would regularly brag about how he got to slaughter animals all day, and that was like his favorite thing to do, and he really enjoyed killing animals. And yeah. So
Ew.
I just like, you know, there's no reason for somebody to like enjoy the work of killing an animal. Like you can like, you know, live with it because it's your job, but like saying like, oh yeah, that's like my favorite thing to do ever.
It's
Yeah,
weird.
enjoying it is definitely
It's a
weird.
little, it's kind of a red flag,
I think
honestly.
yeah.
Also, I feel the same way about hunting for sport because it's the same thing.
It's a little weird, right?
It's
Like
like
you're
getting
killing a
joy
living being, you know?
for
Like I don't know, it's
fun.
just, and it's just like it gives me like serial killer vibes,
Oh, for
obviously.
sure.
So the way I have this set up, I'm gonna kind of do like a timeline wise, because people, like characters in this story, quote unquote characters, will reappear and like kind of go away. And like to keep everything straight, I'm gonna try to keep like a year timeline. I'm gonna tell you what year we're in, what's happening in that year, you know, that kind of thing. So sort of the beginning of our like part of John Bunting's story starts in 1991. Okay, so John Bunting moves to Waterloo Corner Road in Salisbury North, South Australia. This is one of those suburbs of Adelaide, so it's more or less like Salisbury North is part of the city of Salisbury, which is a suburb of Adelaide, if that makes sense. So,
Right, it's kind of like when you live in Seattle, but you don't really live in Seattle. You live in one of the areas
yeah,
of
like
Seattle, but you're
it'd
That's
be
what I was gonna
the
compare it to.
comparison would be well, but the comparison would almost be like Everett to Seattle, because
Okay.
Everett is
Smaller.
close, kind of. But anyway, he moves to Waterloo Corner Road and he befriends his neighbors Mark Hayden and Robert Wagner. So
Both
Wagner,
men.
Wagner at the time was living with his romantic partner Barry Lane. So this is, no matter how hard I looked, I couldn't find if, so Barry Lane also sometimes would be like go by Vanessa, the name Vanessa.
Oh no.
He was
I'm worried for
openly
them.
homosexual, but it doesn't seem like at the time this person identified as transgender. So I'm going to probably use he, him pronouns, because as far as I can tell, like it doesn't seem like they identified as transgender. They were just like, they enjoyed dressing as a woman sometimes, but they considered themselves a homosexual man, if that makes
Okay.
sense.
Okay.
I'm okay with that.
Just to clear it, yeah, just to kind of make that clear. Anyway, so Barry Lane. Barry Lane and Robert Wagner, they were in a relationship, and they had begun their relationship in 1985 when Robert Wagner was only 13 years old.
Ew.
I think Barry Lane at the time was in his late 30s, if I remember correctly.
No.
So,
Oh no.
yeah, so
Okay.
like it was not a consensual relationship when
Now
it
I don't even
began.
care if we called them by the wrong pronouns. Screw you.
No.
But here, I'm gonna just say my piece really quick, and we're gonna move on. I just feel like even criminals, they deserve to be gendered correctly, you know? Anyway,
Yes.
that's why I included
Hold
that
on,
piece.
though.
But
First of all, I take back saying that I was worried for them.
oh, no, yeah,
Don't give a shit about the old man.
Now I'm
at this
kind of-
point, he's old.
Yeah, now I'm concerned about what's gonna happen with
Well,
Yeah.
Barry.
just you guys are getting ahead of yourself.
Sorry,
Calm.
sorry.
Calm. Take a deep breath. Take
It's
a
like
sip of
story
your tea.
time. But
It is like
horror.
story time.
But
But
real life
horror, for
horror.
sure. Right. So anyway, this is when they met. They met in 1991, and Bunting does some crazy shit in the next couple years, and he manages to rope in all of his quote unquote friends and neighbors, and he wraps up a lot of people in his like killing spree and his vendetta against pedophiles. So August 31st, 1992, John Bunting sets his sights on 22-year-old Clinton Trezise. Trezise had spent most of his childhood in foster homes, but he kind of, like, as he grew up, he started to dress a lot more flamboyantly. He was pretty openly gay, and he, again, remember, John doesn't like homosexuals because that's the same thing as pedophilia in his brain, you know? So...
Well, in this case, it was both.
No, wait, what are you talking about?
These two men.
This is somebody else.
I
But
know.
yeah, so Robert Wagner and Barry Lane, it's interesting. There's a lot of hypocrisy. Let's just say that going forward. We're going to
Okay.
get to it, but
Great. Love it. Not really.
basically Clinton Trezise, he became friends with John Bunting and Robert Wagner. And basically Bunting got like set his sights on him and was like, we're gonna invite him over. And so he comes and starts hanging out at John Bunting's house, and he accuses him of being a pedophile, like straight up. And while he's sitting on the couch, he comes up behind him and like smacks him over the head with a shovel. And then he falls to the floor, obviously, and he completely obliterates his head, right? And I saw a piece about how so he was laying like face down on the floor. The front of his skull was also fractured because of the force of it hitting the floor.
Oh,
So like
God.
the back where he was actually getting hit was fractured, but the front of his skull was fractured too from hitting the floor so hard.
Which just
like-
falling would not do that. You would have to be like have force applied.
I want to say this because Bunting had this like crazy angry vendetta, and the torture escalates from here. Like it gets worse.
No.
Clinton's sister, I think it's Cherie. Cherie, attempted to file a missing persons report for him, like when she realized that he kind of was gone. It's my understanding that he was kind of like couch surfing, and so she wasn't, but she also was like, they had a good relationship, and she's like, this is really weird. I haven't talked to him in a long time. But on the other hand, Clinton's brother Scott was kind of like, I wonder if he kind of just like left town and decided to kind of do his own thing and get a fresh start. He didn't have like a ton of luck with his foster homes when he was a young kid. So I think maybe like his brother Scott's like, yeah, we probably shouldn't worry that much about it. It's fine. Either way, no like actual missing persons report was filed for several years. And I think like we're supposed to kind of understand that the police talked Cherie out of filing one because they were trying to reassure that like nothing could have possibly happened to him. Like he probably is just kind of trying to start his life and like, you know, do his own thing. So,
Yeah.
Bunting buried him in a shallow grave on some random farmland, and he wasn't found until August 16th, 1994. So this is almost 2 whole years later.
Wow.
So by this time, Bunting was currently married to a woman named Veronica. Veronica has like a mental disability. Like she's like it seems like Bunting probably took advantage of that, right? So despite being married to Veronica at this time, Bunting begins a relationship with Elizabeth Harvey. She has a son named James Vlasakis, born 12/24/1979, who basically, when he meets John Bunting, thinks John Bunting's the greatest thing since sliced bread. He's an impressionable teenager at this time. He's like 14, and he at one point confides in Bunting that his older half brother, Troy Yude, who was living in the house with Bunting at the time, had molested him when he was younger. So Troy Yude, basically Elizabeth Harvey had been around the block, right? She has 3 sons and they all have different dads.
Right.
Troy Yude basically was abused by Vlasakis' birth father, who was like his stepfather. And then
Okay.
Troy Yude went on to abuse James Vlasakis. That's such an awkward name to say. Vlasakis.
Interesting name.
Yeah, anyway.
Is it a V or a B?
V.
Sorry. Vlasakis.
Okay. 'Cause I was like, it
That's
sounds
what
like
I'm
you're
saying. It's so hard to.
Balsakis.
Oh God.
Cut that out.
Anyway, yeah, so James and Troy and their mom Elizabeth start living with John Bunting because Elizabeth and John are in a relationship. Marcus Johnson, who is Elizabeth's ex-husband and the stepfather of both of her sons, talks about in this documentary I was watching about how when he first met Bunting, like all Bunting wanted to talk about was like his vendetta against pedophiles. Like that was the only thing that he ever brought up in a conversation. And in the interview that I watched, like he's like, yeah, like he didn't want to talk about anything other than that. Like he didn't have anything interesting to say other than, hey, like I'm gonna kill all the pedophiles, and
So
that kind of
weird that
thing.
he was able to maintain any sort of relationship with anybody if that's the truth. Like if that's really all he talked about.
Yeah.
Weirdo.
It seems like he had to have been like pretty charming, is like my only guess. He had to have been like charming and like, because he like obviously was really good with the ladies, as you'll see, or like ladies were really like drawn to him. So in 1997, just to kind of wrap up what we know about Clinton Trezise, his unsolved case in 1997 was featured in a couple episodes of Australia's Most Wanted. Bunting was watching these episodes with his stepson Vlasakis, James, and at one point boasted to James about it being, quote, his handiwork. So he doesn't seem at all worried about getting caught for anything. Like, he is extremely bold and he is extremely, like, what's the word? He kind of thinks he's untouchable. Like, he does all these things, like, with absolutely no worry of getting caught at all, basically. And he was bragging to his stepson, who was 14 at the time, about how he had murdered this guy. And that's because they had found the body. They basically, they had finally filed a missing persons report about Clinton. And so they were featuring him on a show, and Bunting was like, yeah, that was me. He also, I guess, revealed at this point that Barry Lane and Robert Wagner had helped bury Clinton Trezise's body. So at this point, Robert Wagner has, at the very least, him and Barry Lane both had helped John Bunting bury a body. They technically at this point are only guilty of aiding him to bury it, but obviously John Bunting is very manipulative because he gets them to do a lot crazier shit as the time goes on. So December 1995, so it's been a couple years since Clinton died, and obviously John Bunting didn't scratch his weird pedophile execution itch, so he sets his sights on Ray Davies, who is a 26 intellectually disabled man who lives in a caravan on the property of Suzanne Allen in Salisbury North, the suburb. So yeah, like caravan being like a trailer, like a trailer that you have in like a trailer park. So Ray Davies and Suzanne Allen had previously been in some kind of a relationship, but Allen at some point started like openly accusing him of molesting her grandchildren, which I mean is a pretty lofty claim, and I think it's important to note that we can't necessarily know if this was true or not.
Mm-hmm.
Unfortunately, Suzanne started saying this story to John Bunting.
Oh no.
And we know how much John Bunting hates the idea of pedophiles, even if they're not actually a pedophile. So John Bunting abducts the man and he throws him into the trunk of his car. Robert Wagner, basically John Bunting forces Robert Wagner, quote unquote forces, right? He's kind of egging him on. But Robert Wagner strangles Ray Davies to death. And they torture him. They actually John Bunting convinces Suzanne Allen to participate in the torture of Ray Davies. So they've got him I just lost my train of thought. Anyway, yeah, he convinces her to help them torture Ray Davies because obviously that's what he deserves because John Bunting thinks that he's a pedophile. At one point, Suzanne, I guess, like stabbed Ray Davies in the leg several times. I mean, this is like not the craziest thing they did to him, but they buried Ray Davies in John Bunting's backyard, and it wasn't found until the end of all this, right? So it was hidden in his backyard underground for several years. John Bunting and Robert Wagner, they clear out Ray Davies's caravan, and they like repaint it and clean it all up, and they move it to Elizabeth, which is like a nearby town, and they sell it. So basically any evidence that was there disappears, right? Nobody even knows that Ray Davies is missing, which is really sad. Like, nobody misses him, basically. Bunting continues to claim his Social Security checks, and he just kind of vanishes into thin air. Nobody realizes that anything weird is happening at this point. I just want to reinforce that. At this point, Suzanne Allen becomes, like, completely obsessed with John Bunting. And is basically like constantly making sexual advances towards him. And I guess a couple times I think they did sleep together, but overall he is getting like these love letters from her. And we have some of them, like, I should have put an excerpt in here, but she is like, confessing her love for him. And, she thinks he's the bee's knees for whatever reason. Even though she just watched him torture this guy that she accused of being a pedophile. So, November of 1996, Suzanne Allen disappears. Her family goes to her home, and they find it completely trashed. But, like, more so than that, all of her pets are still there, which is really weird to them because Suzanne Allen, like, loved her pets. And, like, that was, like, not like her to just leave all of them behind. This is tricky because Bunting and Wagner, they probably murdered her, right? But there's not really any evidence of it. So like she isn't found until May 1999 when they find all of this out basically. Bunting got tried for it, but the jury couldn't agree that he did it. So he was never convicted of it, but I think at one point Bunting and Wagner basically were like, "Oh, she died of a heart attack, and we just like got rid of her body so that we could keep collecting her Social Security checks." around the same time in 1996, Bunting, so around the same time that Suzanne Allen goes missing, Bunting, Elizabeth Harvey, James Vlasakis, and Troy Yude, they all move to Murray Bridge, which is about 100 kilometers from where they're currently living in Salisbury North. It doesn't seem like he necessarily had like a motivation for this, but so they now live way further away. So August 1997, Michael Gardner, who is 19, this is another case of, I saw them listed as Michelle in some places. So it's possible this person is a transgender woman. I'm going to refer to them as Gardner, so it won't be an issue, but Gardner was like openly gay and was living near Robert Wagner in northern Adelaide in the suburb of Salisbury North. So Robert Wagner like hated Gardner because Gardner was like super openly gay. And this is like so weird because Robert Wagner is gay. He is gay. Like he was in a relationship with a man. Whether or not that was a consensual relationship remains to be seen because, they got together when he was like 13, but the hypocrisy is strong, right? Gardner was strangled to death by John Bunting, and he was put into the same drum as another victim. And this drum was obviously later found in the bank vault. One of Gardner's feet had been cut off in order to close the lid. So he was dismembered, but they also like at the end, like his leg was sticking out. So they had to cut it off so it would fit in there with another body. And then meanwhile,
so gross.
Yeah, not great. Meanwhile, John Bunting and Robert Wagner staged it to look like Gardner had run off with some of the landlady's stuff. So he has this landlady named Nicole, right? And Nicole and Gardner were close. And like in the documentaries that I've seen, Nicole talks really fondly of Gardner. Like it seemed like they were friends. She like mentions one time that Gardner, like she would help paint Gardner's nails, right? Nicole's friend Vicky, weirdly enough, is currently having an affair with Robert Wagner. They also convinced Frederick Brooks, who, remember that name, he comes up later. They also convinced Frederick Brooks to call Nicole at one point and demand Gardner's wallet. They like are pretending to be Gardner's friends. They want it so that they can get into his bank account, right? But they like call Nicole like being like, oh yeah, we're his friends, like we're running off together, so we need his wallet so that he can have his ID or whatever. They just want to get his money, right? And it sucks because Michelle Gardner, whatever, other than Nicole, the landlady, like he also doesn't have anybody to really miss him. Like for all Nicole knows, like Gardner actually did run off and like start a new life or whatever. So this is another victim who nobody really knows is missing. Like nobody has connected any of this. Nobody realizes there's a serial killer on the loose. It's basically just another person that has like disappeared into thin air. And it's kind of sad because like these are people on nobody's radar, and John Bunting knows that. And he continually targets people that he can cash their social security checks. He does that time and time again. Like, there's a number in here somewhere of like how much social security fraud he ended up doing because he would kill people and then pretend to be them to get their money. So October 1997, this is like very shortly after Michael Gardner gets murdered, timeline-wise. Barry Lane, aka Vanessa Lane, Wagner's ex-lover, is 42, and he begins a relationship with 18-year-old Thomas Trevelyan. Thomas Trevelyan will come back up, so remember that name, Trevelyan. They all have terrible names for pronouncing, but
Barry, just to clarify, Barry was the older one in the relationship, correct?
Yes.
Okay.
Yep. Yeah, he is the Wagner's ex-lover. Barry Lane starts a relationship with Thomas Trevelyan, who is like 18. So he's pretty young, and I think this reconfirms for John Bunting, like, oh, which, I mean, there's some truth to it. He does kind of seem like a creep. This is one of the only people that I'm like, yeah, he kind of seems like a creep. Did he deserve to die? Probably not. But seems like he targets young men who don't really understand their sexuality, maybe. Anyway, in Bunting's mind, Lane is basically at the middle of his spider wall. Like, he is like this ring of pedophiles that he has concocted in his head as existing. Barry Lane is like in the middle because he's connected to everybody, right? Like, and Barry Lane also, I guess at this point, had been talking about how he helped bury Clinton Trezise, who nobody's supposed to know was murdered, but like Lane is kind of bragging about it. Like, he's telling everybody who freaking knows about it. And so John Bunting convinces Thomas Trevelyan, who is an extremely emotionally and psychologically disturbed man, right? He apparently had this like weird obsession with wearing military clothes. Like, that's all he would wear was like, you know, like,
that's like total school
like
shooter
camouflage.
vibes.
And
Yeah.
like he was really into like tactical gear and like knives, and he was emotionally disturbed. And John Bunting likes to prey on those people, and he convinces Thomas Trevelyan to help murder Barry Lane. After they torture Barry Lane, John Bunting, this is when he starts like forcing people to like help him cover up his tracks. So he forces Barry Lane to call his mom and say, you know, I'm running away to Queensland. I never want to talk to you again. So that like nobody kind of comes looking for Barry Lane, right? So Thomas Trevelyan, after helping murder,
Well, it seems like at this point he's starting to be like paranoid. Like, he's in the paranoid phase of his killing.
well, it's so weird because it almost doesn't seem like that. It almost just seems like he is starting to be like, okay, this person in particular, somebody might be looking for them, so we should probably cover up our tracks a little bit.
Yeah, I guess like he had killed all the people that he wanted to kill that were like unknown and no one would care.
That were like,
and so now
yeah,
he was like,
that,
well,
like,
people are gonna care, but I'm gonna do it anyway. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So Thomas Trevelyan, after he helps Robert Wagner, and Bunting as well, murder Barry Lane, he moves in with Robert Wagner and Robert's girlfriend, Vicky. Do you remember Vicky?
No.
How do we know Vicky? I know you guys know.
Vicky is the friend.
Yeah, Vicky is Nicole's friend. Nicole
Yeah.
was Michael Gardner's landlady.
And she's dating Robert?
Yes. Yep, they're in a relationship.
Wow, I'm good at this.
So, and things come pretty full circle too. It's just so weird because like there's a lot of names. This is a very confusing case. I'm trying to like each time be like, hey, we remember this person. They were in the story earlier. Like, you know what I mean? Okay. So Thomas Trevelyan seems to be very conscious of the fact that he witnessed Barry Lane's murder. Like, he kind of starts to be sort of paranoid that because he was a witness to this huge crime, even though he was like sort of involved in it, he's starting to worry that Bunting and Wagner are going to be like, well, we don't want you to tell on us, so we're going to... And sure enough, November 5th, 1997, Robert Wagner and John Bunting take Trevelyan out into the woods and stage his suicide. So they have him stand on a box in the middle of the woods, and they tie a noose around his neck, hang it from a tree, and they kick the box out from underneath him. And much to all of our dismay, it works. The police think that he like went out into the woods to kill himself, which is so bizarre because like, why would you go into the middle of the woods to do that? Like, that seems... But like the police, this was like a kid who had kind of a record of being pretty emotionally disturbed, so they really had no other, like, they had no reason to not believe it was suicide, you know? So, April 1998, so like 6 months later, James Vlasakis, this is the young boy who moved in with John Bunting. when his mother started seeing him. He at this point is addicted to heroin, and he is on a methadone maintenance program, and he invites another drug addict, Gavin Porter, who is 31, to live in Bunting's home with him. I I don't know why he thought he was entitled to invite him to live with him, but anyway. John Bunting kind of, because he feels like affection towards James, kind of like overlooks the fact that he uses drugs like a lot. And in this exact same vein, he also is like, Gavin Porter is a useless druggie and he deserves to die, like in the same vein of like pedophiles and homosexuals deserve to die, right? So Gavin Porter is schizophrenic, and so because of this, he's receiving like Social Security money from the state. John Bunting likes targeting people with the government money, He basically, after John Bunting goes to sit on his couch one day, and there's a needle on the couch that he sits on it and pokes himself, and this is like the last straw, right? So he decides that Gavin Porter's got to go. And while James Vlasakis is gone one day, John Bunting and Robert Wagner strangle, beat, and torture Porter, who at this point was like sleeping in his car in like the driveway of John Bunting's house. And they stuff his body in the garage. They just kind of like lay it on the floor in the garage. So this is a pretty pivotal moment because this brings it from like 2 criminals to like 3 criminals, which is like truly a ring, like 2 is like, it's like they're buddies, right? But like 3, this is when he kind of starts bringing a lot of people in on his bullshit, So when James comes home, John Bunting shows him Gavin Porter's murdered body on the floor of the garage. And he also shows him the bodies of Barry Lane and Michael Gardner, who are in a drum at this point in John Bunting's garage. They're dismembered to fit in the barrels, obviously. So James is like, okay, what the fuck? You're psychotic and you're like a crazy murderer. And it seems like at this point, at first, he was probably acting in self-preservation. So he agrees to help continue to retrieve Gavin Porter's Social Security money. Like, he agrees to help with that to kind of impersonate Gavin Porter. And this is when they put Gavin Porter's body into a barrel because his body is found later in the bank vault. So August 1998, John Bunting convinces James that it's time to kill his older brother Troy, he's 21 at this point. And remember, James claims that Troy had molested him as a child. So Bunting is like, well, it's time for us to kill him, obviously. So there's actually like a tape recording of him like saying like, oh, I'm just running off to do whatever. Like they record an explanation so they can play it for people later. They put Troy Yude into a barrel after they murder him and dismember him. So at this point, the cops, like, they still don't know what's going on. They have no they have no reason to believe any of this is connected, and half these people they don't even know are missing. So all they know at this point is that Clinton Trezise was murdered, or no, that he is missing. But they, because they don't have his body yet. They don't find his body until 94, sorry.
But they still don't know that they haven't been able to find the common denominator, which is JJ. But
yeah,
they haven't been able to figure that out.
No, yeah, I went back and looked. 94. So in 94, they found Clinton Trezise's body, but because they buried it on some random person's farm. So like obviously the person that owned the farm found it. But like finding one random body buried, like it doesn't mean there's like a serial killer, And they have like a couple missing people, and they also have some suspected Social Security fraud. Like they don't really have any evidence for it, but it seems like they have like an inkling. So in comes yet another character in this story. There's a lot of names. This whole story gets kind of crazy, but Mark Hayden kind of like starts to be more involved in everything, right? So Bunting starts to like really hate Mark Hayden's partner Elizabeth. Probably for no reason. I think he just basically has it out for her for some reason. But he doesn't immediately kill Elizabeth. He looks instead to her nephew Frederick Brooks.
Wait, which one is Mark? Is Mark, have we heard about Mark yet? Or is this kind
No,
of
Mark is fairly new to the story.
okay?
It's believed he helped dispose of a couple bodies and or knew about a couple of the bodies, but he hasn't really done anything yet.
Okay. So he's
So,
just like a friend, but
yeah.
not a friend that's in this weird murder ring.
I mean, like, he knows about all this shit. He hasn't actually tortured or killed anybody, but he knows about all of this at this point. And yeah, so Mark Hayden, his wife, Elizabeth, Bunting kind of hates her for whatever reason. But Bunting instead is like, I'm going to look at Elizabeth's nephew, Frederick Brooks, who is 18. And do you guys remember how we know Frederick? He made
Yes.
the phone call to the landlady about Michael Gardner.
Yes.
So
Oh.
he, honestly, he's just like an easy target. I think at this point they were kind of picking people for no reason because it's not like John Bunting thought he was a pedophile or a homosexual. He was like there and John Bunting was fucking crazy.
Yeah, he was
So
the easiest person to kill. At this point,
he
John
kind of,
Bunting is like going off from his original like vendetta against pedophiles slash homosexuals to just like, I love murdering people. He goes
well,
back to
yeah,
his
like,
ways of murdering animals for no reason.
yeah, exactly. So, in September 17th, 1998, John Bunting, Robert Wagner, and James Vlasakis get together to kill 18-year-old Frederick. They torture him for hours. They like put him in the bathtub and take all his clothes off, and this is like super graphic, so I just want to put that out there. The torture is terrible. They record his voice. They do like the recording like as they've been doing to kind of set his family off the trail. And then they stick lit cigarettes inside of his nose and ears. The cigarette lighter that was also used to burn a smiley face onto his forehead and burn his nipples. Um, at one point, there was this machine. It has a name, but I can't remember the name of it. It's used for nickel plating, but they use it to burn and electrocute Frederick's genitals. So Bunting at one point, this is kind of, I think, the reason that this case is like one of the most horrendous that I've ever seen, right? The ways that they torture Frederick is by and above like one of the craziest like serial killing torture things I've ever seen. They John Bunting sticks a sparkler like the firework into Frederick's penis and he lights the end of it and watches it burn. Like who I just need to like reinforce how like
Sadistic.
demented and sadistic like not only John Bunting but like Robert Wagner and James Vlasakis, they were like there watching this and obviously it amused them enough because they did this to him twice. They did this with two sparklers.
Okay, so I
And
have to bring, I feel
I
like this is a
just
good time to bring this up, but you guys
yeah.
know about the theory that like the most like anti-homophobic or the most homophobic people in the world are like usually end up being homosexuals themselves.
Yeah.
You
Sure.
guys, have you heard of that? Okay. So that's totally like I he seems like he's obsessed in this specific killing with the genitalia of a young boy, which makes me
Yeah.
think that he might have like been so homophobic and so anti pedophiles and homosexuals one and the same apparently to him that he like wanted to kill other people because he hated himself so much.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Yeah.
That's just what I thought of in this specific one. There wasn't it doesn't seem like that was the case in any of the other murders, but like he seems hyper focused on this kid's genitalia, which is disgusting. But yeah, I mean, it's disgusting torture. Like, ugh.
Just, I
I've
mean, like,
seen I haven't seen much worse, honestly, in a true crime case.
yeah. They the thing that seems like it finally killed Frederick was they used a syringe to like inject water into Frederick's testicles. And this seems like this is what finally like killed him. Um, so Mark Hayden basically collects Frederick's body and um he like drives it. It's unclear like where it was stored between the time that it was between like the time that Frederick died and when all the drums were found at the bank, but it ends up in one of the drums at the bank. And there's security camera footage of Mark Hayden accessing Brooks' social security payments. So this is, like the fourth person now that they're using their death as like an excuse to collect social security payments. And the thing is like, I think some people are like, oh, that had to have been their motive, but it like clearly wasn't their motive, like it was more of a like,
It was
oh,
a
it
bonus.
just so happen it's a bonus. Exactly.
Yeah.
Like it just so happens like, oh, we have all this person's information, let's use it. And the next target of the serial killings is this one seems like they purposely picked this guy because he was going to be easy. He was going to be an easy target. Kind of like Frederick Brooks, honestly. So in October of 1998, Bunting and Vlasakis, they see this guy, Gary O'Dwyer, who's 29. And they see him kind of like limping through the neighborhood because he is pretty badly like physically disabled because of a car crash. And so he gets, you guessed it, lots of government money for that. And basically he is disabled, and so they seem to think, oh, like he won't fight back that much, right? So Vlasakis kind of like becomes friends with Gary to like take him, like to catch him off guard. He's gonna just pretend to be his friend. And one day while he's in their home, Bunting attacks him. And they use that nickel plating machine that I talked about before. They use that to torture Gary O'Dwyer. And they finally get his like bank information from him, which makes it even easier for them to steal his money. They have him do the same thing and record a message for his family to like set his family off the trail, right? So Gary O'Dwyer was strangled to death in his own home, and they dismembered him and put him into a barrel, and he was eventually obviously found in the bank vault. Like a month later, November 1998, John Bunting decides that it's time to kill Elizabeth Hayden. Apparently, like, his reasoning, like, during trial was like, oh, like, she didn't want to have sex with me because she was married to his friend, Mark. Sorry, some of this is, like, so extra, man. Like, ugh. Anyway. So, Elizabeth Hayden, she has a sister, Jodi Elliott. And Jodi Elliott briefly was in a relationship with John Bunting. Remember how I said, like, John Bunting, like, he has all the girls on his dick for some reason. Like, so he has to be charismatic on some level, I guess. But, yeah, anyway, so her sister Jodi lives on Elizabeth and Mark's property. Like, she lives in this house that's, like, kind of behind Elizabeth and Mark's house. Jodi also had previously, I didn't mention it, but she kind of has been involved in some of this as well because she helped impersonate Suzanne Allen, and by doing this, they were able to collect like $17,000 of Social Security payments from, like, in Suzanne Allen's name, right? Jodi, this is like inconsequential, but Jodi was also Frederick Brooks's mom, obviously, because Frederick Brooks was Elizabeth's nephew. All these, I don't know, there's just so many names that, like, sometimes I'm like trying not to confuse you guys with the name, but then I'm also like, oh, just so you know, this person's connected.
I feel like this is
Um,
quite the entanglement.
yeah. But yeah, anyway, Elizabeth was murdered by John Bunting and Robert Wagner on November 20th. Her brother, who I guess she was pretty close with, reported her missing like the very next day. So Mark Hayden appears to not really had any involvement, obviously, because it was his wife, but it's almost certain that he helped cover up the murder, like, i.e., get rid of the body. So Elizabeth Hayden, if you guys remember from earlier, she is the reason that the police started looking because her brother was like, "Hey, something's weird. Like nobody um like she wouldn't go anywhere. Like this is weird." So um John Bunting at some point started renting out an abandoned bank vault in Snowtown, which is like this really little town. And it seems like it's unclear when they transferred all of the barrels into the bank vault. They were found there in 1999, but it doesn't it's like kind of unclear how long they were just like hanging out in John Bunting's garage. Which is even crazier. Like just like in this neighborhood, like I
Chilling.
don't know. Plus it's so weird because Elizabeth Harvey, who James's mom, who is in a relationship with John Bunting, it seems like she like literally had no idea, which seems crazy to me. She was never able to testify. She died of cancer like right before the trial started, if I remember. But I think she genuinely didn't know what was going on, which is insane. But like in her defense, neither did the fucking cops. The cops were like had no idea that they had killed like 6 people.
Right.
So, May 9th, 1999, David Johnson, this is James Vlasakis' stepbrother. So if you remember earlier, Marcus, who was talking about how, like, when he met John, all he wanted to talk about was pedophiles, this is his son. Um, and this was Elizabeth Harvey's last husband before she met Bunting. And David Johnson, he, for whatever reason, Bunting like did not like him, and Bunting was constantly like referring to him as the F word, a faggot, and kind of just like had it out for him for whatever reason. It's unclear why he like favored James. Like, I wonder if it's because James had this like whole sob story about his brothers abusing him, but um James took David Johnson to Snowtown at one point to look at a computer that he had told him was for sale at one point, and he was like, "Yeah, let's go check it out." So, they arrive at the bank that they've been renting to store the dead bodies, and Bunting and Wagner attack him. So they handcuff him and force him to read a script, and like they had done with the other people to like kind of throw everybody off the trail. Which is probably in this case, it makes sense because his dad probably would have looked for him. It seems like his dad wasn't like that weird. Um, they also forced him to give them his bank account PIN number. And Robert Wagner and James Vlasakis left David Johnson at the abandoned bank in Snowtown with John Bunting and Mark Hayden. So Wagner and Vlasakis, they go to Port Wakefield to try to get into David Johnson's bank account and get some money out. They end up being unsuccessful, and so they come back. And by the time they got back, David Johnson had died. He had been tortured to death, and he was no longer alive by the time they got back. So Bunting and Mark Hayden had killed David Johnson while they were gone. So Bunting, this is where it gets like, I mean, if it could even get more weird, but Bunting and Wagner, they fried up part of David Johnson and consumed him, so cannibalized him.
Cannibalism was like, they really didn't need to add that.
Right.
No? Just
Honestly, this
note,
story has everything.
while we were just talking, or while we've been talking about this, I've been looking up pictures of the people so I can like save them for the posts that we'll do on Instagram.
And what are your thoughts? I'm curious.
Well, first of all, freaking Mark Hayden looks like he would murder everybody he's ever met. He's freaky looking.
He kind of gives me cult leader vibes.
Yeah, John Justin Bunting though doesn't look like he's that evil.
He's very unassuming.
He does. And so that makes that kind of, I understand now what you're saying about how like he must have been super charismatic because people trusted him. And honestly, it's because he doesn't look like a serial killer. Mark Hayden, on the other hand, I wouldn't mess around with. Robert Joe Wagner looks like the type of guy that would like beat you up at a bar, kind of. Needless to say, I'm shocked by the appearances, I guess.
I'm not really. They all look like
I'm shocked about everyone's except for Mark, because Mark looks like he'd kill you.
The weird thing,
Mark is scary.
I think the weird thing is like John Bunting almost looked like he could be like a professor at a university.
He looks like
so evil. He's
like dorky and I think it made him like approachable.
Also, though, Mr. Sweater Vest, he looks like a little kid.
He's very
young.
young.
James is young. I think he by the time the trial started, he was only like 19. Fast forward, there are now 8 people inside this bank vault. May 20th, 1999. This is when the police finally catch wind of this like bank vault. The police follow, there's apparently this lead of somebody saw like a Land Cruiser. I can't remember which one of them drives a Land Cruiser, but like driving through town with these huge barrels in the back of it. And this lead takes them to the bank. As soon as they enter the bank, they immediately smell rotting bodies.
Wait, so other people at the bank weren't noticing this?
No, it's an abandoned bank. It's like just a building. Sorry, I keep referring it to as a bank. It's an abandoned building.
Bank. Okay, you were saying bank vault, and I was like, how are they getting barrels into this bank vault? And the bank workers are just like, okay.
They're just going along with it.
Don't you know that banks just don't ask questions? They're just like, yeah.
It's like an old
banks ask a lot of questions.
So yeah, inside the bank vault there's 8 bodies. So there are 6 barrels and 8 bodies. I know Barry Lane and Michael Gardner were in the same barrel together. I can't remember how the other combinations were, but the bodies are brought to Adelaide to kind of start, because they have no idea. Like, you kind of have to take a step back and realize that like the cops have no idea who any of these people are. And they need to like reassemble them and or figure out what parts belong to whose body, who's even in here. Luckily, John Bunting was stupid. And he stored the bodies in hydrochloric acid, which apparently is the wrong kind of acid. It ended up kind of like preserving the bodies instead of dissolving them. I know.
I hate to laugh.
If there's a laughing moment in all of this, that's it. You have permission to laugh.
Fuck you, John. You were an idiot.
I'm giving you permission to laugh.
That's karma right there.
I know.
I do all this. That is like serial killer 101 is they do all this stuff and they think they're hot shit, and then boom, they like messed up. They couldn't even freaking kill people right because they're such pieces of shit and they deserve to rot in hell.
Yeah.
Bye, JJ.
I mean, hold on. How did you? Okay. So basically did the opposite of what he wanted. It's like when people dump bodies in water. Is it water that kind of preserves them?
Well, yeah, water, like, it doesn't preserve them.
Because it keeps them cold.
It slows down the decomp process.
Because, yeah. Okay. I'm on the same page. This is fucking... if it's not wild already, it's wild.
And I have to... It's gonna... Well, I mean, it's wild. They find lots of other incriminating stuff in the bank vault, because it kind of seems like somewhere along the line they decided to just store all of the murder stuff in the bank vault.
Oh, so it's like they're
kind of suspecting that like nobody would ever, I guess they were suspecting nobody would ever look there. But inside the bank vault, it's got just like a real quick list. Knives, obviously. A bloodstained saw. Can you guess what they were using that for? Don't even guess. Don't even tell me. Don't tell me. Cutting well, and like dismembering the body so they fit in the barrel.
It's not funny. It's not. But
It's not funny at all, but I get you.
it's so funny that it makes me uncomfortable, or it's so not funny that it makes me uncomfortable, which makes me laugh. And I'm just like, I'm laughing because I'm uncomfortable. I am being Syrian.
There's a double barrel shotgun. There's lots of rope, rolls of duct tape, rubber gloves, cloths like rags, and here's the name of it. It's a Variac metallurgy tool. That's like the thing that they use, the metal plating thing was.
What does it do?
Variac, I don't know what any of those words mean. It's used to like engrave stuff on metal, if I'm understanding correctly.
Okay.
But it also like they like attached like jumper cable looking things to it to shock people and to like electrically shock people's like genitals.
Are any of them into metallurgy?
If I remember correctly, the machine belonged to James.
The young one?
Yeah.
Sweater vest? Okay.
So somewhere in the midst of doing heroin, he took up metallurgy.
You know, as you do. What else are you supposed to do in Australia?
I don't know.
I'm kidding. Obviously, literally anything
kangaroo?
else.
I don't
like,
know.
Eat shrimp on the Barbie, go swimming in the ocean and get attacked by all the animals they have there.
Die by spider bite.
I'm kidding. This is like Australia stereotypes. No.
Yeah, sorry Australians.
Sorry, Australian. Sorry, my Aussies. Mon fallait. Oh, God.
No,
I'm so.
stop.
I'm like, Cleo!
Okay. Guys, I know we're getting slap happy, but we're almost done.
No,
I
really
promise.
though. Cleo.
Slap happy. Okay. Well, I don't even know what that means. So continue.
It means you're so happy you start slapping people.
So the oh my gosh. So the trial of John Bunting and Robert Wagner ended up lasting almost 12 months. This is the longest in the history of South Australia ever. In December of 2003, John Bunting was finally convicted of committing 11 murders, and Robert Wagner was convicted of 10 murders. He actually only confessed to 3. Both of them pretty early on in the trial were like maintaining their innocence. It seems like Robert Wagner caved first, but Bunting, like, I don't know that he ever pled guilty. James Vlasakis, however, he pled guilty to 4 of the murders. In 2004, Mark Hayden was convicted on 5 counts of assisting with murder. He only admitted to 2. The jury did not come to a decision on the 2 murder charges against Mark Hayden, and Wendy Abraham, who was the senior prosecutor, said that she would retry him for them. Basically, there was like a mistrial. The final count against Bunting and Wagner for murdering Suzanne Allen was dropped May 7th, 2007, and that was a mistrial. The jury couldn't decide if he had done it or not, or if they had done it or not. So Justice Brian Ross Martin determined that John Bunting was the ringleader, and so that's kind of like that's the picture, the snapshot we have of this is like he kind of was like talking all these other guys into doing it. And so for this, he sentenced John Bunting to 11 consecutive terms of life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. Robert Wagner was sentenced to 10 consecutive terms, also not eligible for parole. Robert Wagner said, like, as his, like, because they let you talk after they read you your sentence, he said, quote, "Pedophiles were doing terrible things to children. The authorities didn't do anything about it. I decided to take action. I took that action. Thank you." And then dropped the mic.
But like,
it just goes to show you, like, these guys literally thought they were doing God's work.
So they killed how many people? Total of 8?
So Bunting killed 10.
Okay, so they were killed a lot of people, and I'm pretty sure only like 2 of them were even potentially pedophiles, right?
Yeah.
The rest, they were either like gay, like homosexuals, or they just didn't like them. Like, clearly, I feel sort of bad for Wagner because he was clearly being like severely lied to obviously.
Yeah.
He was so, and even
But I
in
mean,
like his final moments as a free man, he's like, yeah, I did what I was right, which is just so, it seems so culty to me.
Well,
oh, it's so
yeah.
culty.
10 out of 10 cold.
It's so culty. And like, let's be clear, Robert Wagner also had concocted this like weird, he had kind of bought into the whole pedophiles are everywhere thing, you know? So James Vlasakis was sentenced to 4 consecutive life sentences. He wasn't eligible for parole for 26 years. So he's going to be in prison for like 20 till 2029 at least, and then he'll be eligible for parole. And then Mark Hayden was sentenced to 25 years, and he had to serve at least 18 years before he was eligible for parole.
Wow.
It's just so weird because in the end they kind of got what was coming to them. So I think I forgot to mention, but James Vlasakis, he testified like to get a shorter sentence. And I think also they kind of had gathered that he was guilty by association, but like it seemed like he was heavily manipulated. Like he was very young, and like John Bunting was like a father figure to him, and so I think they gave him, he still had to serve at least 26 years before he could be eligible for parole, but in a way he got out of it pretty easily
Compared to Wagner.
We'll
and
see
Bunting,
we'll see if
so.
prison rehabilitates him, but so this case, Australia kind of like silenced a lot of it. There was a like a suppression order. There was actually 250 suppression orders revolving around this case that like basically prohibited the media from doing any like reporting on it, essentially.
Yeah.
Like they couldn't say any like details. Like they could kind of report on like the main gist of it, but in early 2011, all of the orders were lifted because they were making a movie called Snowtown. It's like a docu-drama-ish is what I would describe it as. And
Like Monster, kind of, how it's like not real.
yes, like Monster about Arlene Wuornos, yeah.
Real. Yeah.
And so after that, it just blew up. Snowtown, like weirdly, it became like a tourist destination. There was all kinds of like weird like trinkets that places in Snowtown were selling, like to kind of cash in on the serial killer. It's like, I don't know. I think people were just really shocked because there's not a lot of serial killers in Australia. It's not really like the US where it's like fairly common. Like there's not a lot that they know about serial killers, and so yeah, the town like tried to cash in on it basically. So if I remember reading it correctly, they changed the name of the town. It's not called Snowtown anymore. I can't remember exactly what it's called now, but because it was so negatively affected by all of this bullshit.
Yes.
But yeah, that is the Snowtown Murders case. That's all I've got. I know that was a lot. I say that's all.
That's all.
That's all. Huh. I know this was a long one, so hopefully you are not sick of hearing us talk. We'd love if you followed us on Instagram at Who What Where Podcast. We're also on Facebook and YouTube. And you can get us anywhere you listen to podcasts. We are kind of, we're looking forward to continuing at this podcast. So if you have any ideas or suggestions, send us a DM on Instagram. I think you can DM us on Facebook. But yeah, I don't know. We are very thankful for our little corner of the podcast world. But yeah, we'd love to hear what you thought about this case. So let us know on Instagram. We're going to post some relevant pictures over there. I think Hannah already found some pretty juicy ones. So yeah, we will see you guys on Monday. Thanks so much for listening.